A waitress says she was paid just 1 cent for 6 weeks of restaurant work. So, a TikTok user said she took home just 1 cent over the course of 6 weeks while working as a waitress at a Nashville restaurant. The 25-year-old service worker named Linny shared a video to the social media site last month showing off her pay stubs. The federal minimum wage for tipped employees across the United States is $2.13 an hour. However, in Tennessee, federal Social Security and Medicare taxes are deducted from earned income. That left Linny with a measly 1 cent from her employer. Now, it's unclear how many hours Linny worked across the 6 week pay period, and she did not disclose how much money she accumulated in tips within the same time frame. That being said, for those that don't know, a lot of waitresses, their income is solely pretty much determined by their tips. And it's typically a humongous amount depending on their looks, their service, how good they are at, like, basically how charismatic are they? Because the more charisma that they have, the way easier it is for them to make a lot more money. However, in the caption of her video, the waitress writes to her TikTok followers, "Tip your servers." So many viewers bristled at Lenny's demand, with one replying, "It's not my job to pay your bills. I got my own to pay." That comment was liked a whopping 10,200 times. "Blame the business you're working for, not the consumers," another viewer concurred. And in other countries, they don't need to tip because they pay a living wage. And in fact, in some countries, it's actually against the law for you to actually tip an employee. And sometimes, even if it may not be against the law, it's actually viewed as basically an insult to the employee, to the employee and the employer, because it's basically like, oh, they can't even afford to pay someone a good salary. So it's very interesting in other countries. So I've easily made $4,400 a month being a server. Don't let those empty checks fool you if you're serving and making so much more than you get as an hourly rate, a third person wrote. And again, there are some waitresses that could honestly probably make pretty close to what a doctor makes after taxes and expenses, just because of the sheer size of their tips, right? Like, there are some bartenders and even hostess that make a lot of money just from tips, especially depending on what they look like, which, there could be a lot of things said about that. But if you are a remotely attractive lady and you're functioning off of tips and you have even just a little bit of charisma, you could make a lot of money. However, others disagreed and came to Linny's defense. "If you can't tip, go to McDonald's or cook at home," one supporter stated. And here's the thing, I would have to agree with that comment, because look, if you are going to some place where it's kind of assumed that you are going to be tipping there, then you should just go there expecting to tip a certain percentage, right? Now, that being said, if your waitress or waiter is providing super bad service, well, guess what? They should get a tip reflecting that type of service. Just because they're serving you doesn't mean that they should deserve a good tip, right? But if they do a really good job, of course they deserve a very good tip. "Y'all did not pass the vibe check. When someone is taking your order and bringing your food, they are providing a service," a second person added. But again, just because they are providing a service doesn't mean that they should get a very good tip, right? Because again, if they provide a horrendous service where they badmouth people, you could hear them talking about people or other customers, you could hear them insulting people, they bring things in very bad ways, they forget everything. There are many reasons why you would not tip a server the full amount or a even bigger amount due to the quality of the service that they actually bring. Of course, not all servers have faced the same situation. Last month, a waitress at Hooters took to TikTok saying she was cashed up thanks to generous tips, and still the hours are grueling. Kristen Songer, who works at a franchise in South Carolina, claimed she bartended for 7 hours on a Sunday and made a hefty $408 in tips. So working from 10:30 a.m. Monday to midnight, she made $350 and $190 for a 6-hour shift the following day. Because again, this is the only problem when it comes to like employees that basically work on like a tip type of basis, is that your income varies a lot, right? You could technically make basically an exponential amount of money, right? You could, like, let's say that you're like a bartender in a very like crowded area or like very frequented area, right? Who doesn't care about any like vaccine mandates or anything like that. You could potentially bring in a few grand in a single day. But if you're also a bartender, but in a place that is very limited or very restricted, guess what? You're not going to be making nearly anything close to that, right? And so this is the thing that people need to understand. Just because they don't necessarily make a lot of money on hourly wage doesn't mean that it's impossible for them to make a lot of money, but also there's still a possibility that they might not make much money at all. Because the way to really think about it, right, is think of it kind of like in the sense of like pretty much a 100% commission-based job, right? If you don't get sales, you don't get paid. But the only limit to how much you get paid is whether or not you get sales, right? Meaning you could technically make 6 figures in sales, but you could also make 0. And this is basically the same thing when it comes down to jobs that like focus heavily on tips, because they could literally make 6 figures a year or make basically nothing, right? And it all depends on whether or not they have enough charisma, they provide enough service, and whether or not people are generous or not to where they make money at all, right? So that's something to really think about. Now, again, yeah, you should tip your server if they provide good service. If they do not provide good service, guess what? You should not tip them well at all, right? Not only that, if you are someone who is working in this type of industry, you really need to create a budget so that you could deal with these massive potential fluctuations in terms of income, right? You should really have like basically like a sinking fund like that runs like every single month that you could pretty much like stay roughly the same amount every single month regardless of what happens. Because you could easily, as a like tip heavy employee, you could easily bring in, maybe $4,000 in 1 month, all the way down to like $1,000 in a single month after taxes and everything. So you gotta be really careful with this type of job. But again, it's not the end of the road. You just gotta be smart, and you gotta really focus on having a very good budget, and also try to make sure that you don't have like really any debt that you're carrying, because that is going to weigh you down in a very bad way. And it could definitely get worse if you have a few bad months in a row, right? So definitely focus on getting out of debt. Now, the blonde bartender boasted that she was tipped $60 by a man who handed over the cash just for talking to him. So get debt free at 40inbox.com. Feel free to give your thoughts. See you in future episodes.